Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of India's largest media family, ZEE. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all for the second edition of ZEE Leadership Series 2014. With a global footprint spanning across 169 countries, catering to more than 730 million viewers globally, ZEE truly imbibes the values of our brand positioning, that is, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is my family. As we progress towards our goal of being ranked amongst the top global media conglomerates, this series marks one more important step in that direction. To share his vision about this initiative and to take the evening forward, I would now like to invite our MD and CEO, Shri Puneet Goenka, on stage for the welcome address. Please give him a huge round of applause.
Good evening, friends. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for the second edition of ZEE Leadership Series, our flagship intellectual property of the ZEE corporate brand. At ZEE, innovation and leadership have been integral elements of our DNA. And I firmly believe that it would be these elements which will be instrumental in taking ZEE to the envisaged goal of being ranked amongst the top global media conglomerates. Over 2 decades, ZEE has been the cultural ambassador of our nation to the rest of the world. Being the pioneers of the TV industry, it is ZEE's responsibility to take lead in establishing a platform that enables interaction with global leaders who have made a difference to the world. That's how the idea of ZEE Leadership Series was born. I'm glad today that Alan and Divya are here with us this evening to complement our efforts and, most importantly, to share their valuable perspectives. Interactions like these don't just prepare us to face the important junctures in our professional lives, but they also give us a starting point to nurture those ideas which will shape tomorrow. The latest reports reflect that the total global media and entertainment revenues will rise to US $2.1 trillion by 2016. My humble take on the same is that if revenues are expected to grow manifold, so should the ideas and innovations. In such a context, it gets extremely imperative for us to regularly pause and introspect our approach towards achieving our goals. I thank each one of you for taking time out and wish you a great evening ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now, without taking much time, I would like to invite Mr. Sameer Bangara, co-founder and MD of Kyuki.com, the digital initiative he founded along with Mr. A.R. Rahman and Mr. Shekhar Kapoor. Kyuki is one of the largest online video networks in India focused on music. Sameer will be doing the interactive session with our first guest of the evening. Sameer, please come.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ZEE Leadership Series 2014. Today we have with us Divya Narendra, founder of Harvard Connect. 10 years on, 32-year-old Divya says his focus now lies with a different type of social network, referring to his latest startup, SumZero. SumZero is an online collaboration platform for select professional investors that has been gaining traction amongst thousands of hedge fund and mutual fund analysts. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Divya Narendra.
Most entrepreneurs would agree that, even having ideas, everyone has ideas. The real question is, how do you execute those ideas on minimal resources? Just given the challenges of raising money and sort of all the things that are necessary to build a vision out. I thought I'd start out with just giving a little bit of background on myself. I was born and raised in New York, but my parents are from Delhi. I think had a pretty traditional childhood. Traditional Indian parents who were pretty strict, very education focused. I ended up, doing pretty well in school. Studied applied mathematics at Harvard from 2000 to 2004, and I think for me, like a lot of students, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't sure what the right career path would be for me, and I hadn't quite discovered, my own sort of career passion. And I sort of see myself as very lucky to have had my first brush with entrepreneurship at a fairly young age. When I was a junior in college, spent 2 years at Credit Suisse doing investment banking, and started learning kind of all the basic tools that I needed to become a better entrepreneur. I realized while I was in banking that I really enjoyed investing and then the markets, the public markets particularly. And so in my second year of banking, I started interviewing at hedge funds, and found a fund called Sowood Capital in Boston that was a spin-off of the Harvard Management Company. So the entire team at Sowood used to manage the university endowment, or Harvard's endowment, and then left to start this fund. So I joined this team in 2006, and a year later, the fund got hit by the credit crisis, which came approximately a year before the equity markets collapsed in 2008. And then our PM shut the whole fund down. Everyone was fired. So here I am. I'm 20. At that time, I think I was 26 years old, and had just lost my job. Now, fortunately for me, the financial crisis ended up being kind of more of an opportunity than just a period of turbulence, because it gave me the opportunity to actually give entrepreneurship a second chance, and that's sort of when I started SumZero. So SumZero, just to kind of summarize what it is, it's an online community that enables professional investors, specifically hedge fund and mutual fund professionals, to share their research. For SumZero, the predominant source of investment research was actually coming from Wall Street, but there was no community for professional investors to actually share ideas and see what their thoughts were. Good idea is actually worth a lot, right? If you make a good investment and that investment returns, a healthy return, that's worth a lot to you. That's kind of what your compensation is based on. So if you could aggregate a lot of good ideas, that seemed to me as being something that would be even more worthwhile. So in 2007, I set out to build SumZero. I had a co-founder, actually, who was a buddy of mine from college. He was a year older than me. And so we partnered together to build SumZero out. Fortunately, this time around, I had some experience to kind of get things started. But again, I didn't have venture capital behind me. It was really a matter of figuring out how to bootstrap the business. And so what I did was I spent a lot of time up front kind of researching the industry, understanding the competitive landscape. I ended up designing the initial version of SumZero on my own. So I actually used, strangely enough, Microsoft Excel, which I'd become very, pretty good with Excel just from my banking days. I ended up taking that design and then giving it to developers. And once again, I kind of ran into problems. So we hired a developer. The first company that we hired to actually code for SumZero was a firm out in San Francisco that used a lot of really great buzzwords, but were basically kind of a fraudulent operation. They weren't actually able to deliver on their promises, and we lost 3 or 4 months of time and nearly $50,000 of my own savings, because the only thing that was funding SumZero at that time were my savings, just from my days in finance. And then we ended up firing them, and then finding another team in Miami to help build SumZero out even further. They got us to a point where in 2008, I had a basic skeletal version of this vision working. It was far from perfect, but I think we were at a point where we could just experiment and start letting initial test users check out the product. So I told all my friends who were in the industry, who were working at funds, to just join it. I think, frankly, a lot of them were doing me a favor, and they sort of trusted that eventually it would turn into something more useful. But in the beginning, the site was crashing on a daily basis, and it was actually kind of tough. But what I realized early on was that despite the deficiencies of the website, people were still using it because it was really the only place you could go to get the content that people were sharing on SumZero. And that helped me kind of start building momentum. It helped me attract more talented engineers who were, at that point, were starting to get more excited about what we were building. A year later, I ran out of cash. So I depleted all of my savings, really had no more money. Kind of my partner, I think, at that point was a little spent as well, like was somewhat reticent of putting even more capital at risk. I kind of just took the approach of like, I'm gonna put my own savings at risk and keep marketing the site. And I spent hours and hours on the phone marketing SumZero and explaining to our members how to use the site. So I would demo the site for a few minutes, and at the end of the conversation, I would ask the user, hey, do you have any friends who might want to join? And one conversation led to another, and every now and then I would get an inbound inquiry like, hey, are you guys looking for capital? Or are you guys interested in raising some money? And I think those conversations eventually added up so that when we finally did raise money, and then I went off to school. So I spent 3 years getting a joint law and business degree at Northwestern. And the intent there was to try to figure out, again, like, how do I want to take SumZero to the next level? What is the sort of the right business model for the business? And for me, it was just like a great time to experiment with the concept and keep building it on the side. Actually, in school, I burned out. We burned through our capital once again in my second year, and I was forced to think, even more about like how we were going to make money. We ended up actually doing putting banner ads on SumZero in 2011. And somehow, this kind of blew my mind, but we were able to, we did something like $130,000 or $140,000 in banner advertisement sales, split between 3 different advertisers who were all paying, something on the order of $70 CPMs to reach our community. And it sort of occurred to me like, wow, if these advertisers are willing to, are sort of valuing our users at that level, maybe there is something real here that can be monetized and built into a real business. I moved back to New York in 2012, and I've been focused on building our team out. We're still very much a startup. We're about 10 people, mostly engineers, but very much focused on user experience, making sure that our members are engaged as much as possible, and also building kind of what hopefully becomes a large subscription business. Because I think what we've sort of found is that as we've grown our community, as we've grown our research repository, that there are a lot of funds that reach a certain scale, at which point they don't necessarily want to share their own proprietary ideas, but they still want to lurk into our community and see what other people are saying and thinking.
I would now like to invite on stage Mr. Ridham Desai, Managing Director, Morgan Stanley India, to introduce our esteemed keynote speaker for the evening. Ridham, can we have you on stage, please?
I think a lot of you may already know Alan. He's one of the most respected economists in the world. He served as chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. He was a member of his cabinet from 2011 to 2013. He's also served previously as chief economist to both the Department of Treasury as well as the Department of Labor. According to research papers in economics, Alan features amongst the top 50 economists in the world. It's a great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you Alan Kruger.
Hi, it's really an honor for me to participate in this forum tonight. I feel very much welcome as part of the ZEE family, and I very much appreciate that generous introduction. What I thought I would do is tell a different kind of story, tell a story about the U.S. recovery, how the U.S. economy is doing, and then discuss U.S.-India relations, both business relations and international relations. The key question today is how much slack remains in the U.S. economy. And that question typically focuses on the job market. So let me say a bit about how the U.S. job market is doing. The unemployment rate peaked at 10% in October of 2009 and has been coming down since then. Unemployment fell to 6.1% last month. The labor force participation rate is down to 62.8%, which is back to the level in 1978. What's caused labor force participation to drop? Well, there are a number of factors. First, because of the deep recession, Some people decided to stay in school longer, not to enter the labor force. Some people decided to retire early, to exit the labor force. Now, one of the aspects of the current economy in the U.S. is that the unemployed have been unemployed for a relatively long period of time. A third of the unemployed have been out of work for more than half a year. My research has suggested that the long-term unemployed put relatively little pressure on the labor market. They have one foot out the door. Many of them are likely to leave the labor force. If the economy continues to improve the way I expect, I would expect the Federal Reserve to begin raising interest rates in the middle of next year, or perhaps a little bit earlier. Now, there's been a debate about how the Federal Reserve's policies have affected emerging markets, and in particular in India. Let me just say that the Federal Reserve's objective is very clear. The Congress of the United States gives the Federal Reserve a mission to create conditions for maximum employment and stable prices. Now, the Federal Reserve also, in practice, has taken on the mission of maintaining financial stability. Financial stability obviously influences both unemployment and inflation in the United States. So the Federal Reserve will look at how its actions affect the rest of the world to the extent that it could cause destabilization, which would then feed back to the U.S. Well, what about the impacts of all of this for India? As you all know, when Chairman Bernanke hinted that the Federal Reserve will start to taper back in May of 2013, that led to the taper tantrum. And the exchange rate in India, the rupee, fell by almost 20%. Now, the reaction in India was quite severe, with about $15 billion of capital outflows immediately. On the other hand, I think the subsequent developments for India, despite the scare, have been quite positive. India's current account balance is much closer to balance now than it was then. India has built up reserves. The exchange rate, as you can see here, is stabilized since the end of last summer. And I think all of this means that India is better prepared to weather a rise in U.S. interest rates when they occur, most likely sometime next year. And the IMF expects to see India's growth rate pick up from 5.6% this year to 6.6% next year. And there's certainly a tremendous amount of optimism about economic opportunity in India today with the election of Prime Minister Modi. At the same time, India's economy is not nearly as competitive as it could be. The World Economic Forum downgraded India's competitiveness. India's rank in the world fell from number 60 to number 71 last year. By many measures of competitiveness, India does poorly, and that's particularly true of the manufacturing sector. In India, 84% of the manufacturing firms have under 50 employees. That compares to 25% in China. The scale of manufacturing in India seems to be off, seems to be too small scale, doesn't take advantage of economies of scale for larger manufacturers. So there's a long way to go when it comes to productivity and competitiveness in India. One recommendation for improving managerial productivity is to have a more competitive economy, to allow new entrants, to have more international competition, to have more multinationals producing here. I think the agreement that was struck with China to try to improve manufacturing productivity in India will be healthy, and much more can be done along those lines to improve managerial efficiency in India. Secondly, raising the skills of the workforce. Over 70% of workers have less than a primary school education. Far too many workers are illiterate. Half of the workforce is still on farms. India's labor force is going to grow by 1.5% a year from now until 2030. That's actually a very positive sign. The U.S. wishes we could see labor force growth at that rate. But the flip side means that India will need to create 10 million non-farm jobs a year to accommodate population growth and movement from farms to cities. That means that employment will have to grow in manufacturing, in construction, in tourism, hospitality, and retail trade. So India will need to improve access to education and also improve the quality of schooling. What else would help? Well, as Governor Rajan has proposed, modernizing the financial sector, improving the incentives for the financial sector to invest in private sector firms would help. I think that India's fiscal position can be improved by improving government efficiency, by improving services, and cutting inefficient subsidies. Another macroeconomic concern has been the high inflation in India, but that also appears to be under control, and it could be brought further under control by faster productivity growth, which would mean that companies could sell their products at a lower price, by embracing international trade. Deregulation would help to reduce price inflation, and continued good monetary policy would all help to reduce price inflation. Over the longer time period, if you go back since 2000, trade between the US and India has been growing very rapidly. Since 2000, US-India trade increased by a factor of almost 5 to nearly $100 billion a year now. India investment in the US is up from just $300 million in 2000 to $9 billion today, an increase of 30-fold. US investment in India is up from $2.4 billion to $28 billion. At the same time, over the last couple of years, it seems that the increase has slowed and that we've had something of a plateau. I would describe the outlook of American businessmen, businesswomen, when it comes to India, as cautious optimism. There's a lot of concern about red tape, about bureaucracy, about licensing requirements, about intellectual property, and at the same time, there's a lot of optimism about the new government. I think there's no question that the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy are natural allies. So let me conclude. I think India's economic problems are significant, but they're manageable. And that's better than what you can say for much of the world. I truly admire ZEE Entertainment's mission statement, "The world is my family." As I thought about it, I thought India should adopt a similar type of mission, "The world is my economy." India could be a factory to the world. It already is a back office to many American companies. It could be a back office to the world. It could be an innovator for the world economy.
Thank you, Rhythm, and thanks, Alan. That was, I would say, a very enlightening experience. Now, to deliver the vote of thanks, I would like to invite Mr. Roland Landers, Head Corporate Brand ZEE, on stage. Roland.
From views on revival of the US economy and Indo-US business relations, to insights into the digital world, of creating big businesses out of small ideas, yet creative ideas, this evening has been a blend of interesting and unique perspectives. I'm sure each one of us will take a lot of nuggets from the interactions we've had with Alan and Divya. And on behalf of ZEE, the ZEE Group, ZEE Entertainment, and ZEE Media, we'd like to thank Alan Kruger and Divya Narendra for making the second edition of the ZEE Leadership Series a success. We would also like to thank each one of you for taking this time out and joining us this evening. And a special mention to our sponsors, Mr. Prashant Solomon from Shintels, for your support. We look forward to seeing you at the next edition of the ZEE Leadership Series next year.